If you're into true scary stories and true crime, make sure to subscribe to the channel for new videos every week. I work as an executive in a decently prominent business. My job is very stressful and takes up nearly all of my free time. I do get a couple of weeks of vacation each year, and when I take them, I tend to go all out and spend all of my time alone. It's exactly what I need in order to recharge my battery and to get myself back into the frame of mind for work. In fact, I used to take my vacations in the woods. I would rent a nice cabin in the middle of nowhere and then spend my time in silence. After 2 weeks of this, I was so ready to get back to work, I had enough energy to last another year. But I'll tell you why I don't do this anymore. A few years back, I rented a nice secluded cabin and was getting ready to have a relaxing time, just reading a good book and sitting by the fire. I don't want to mention exactly where this happened, but I can tell you it was very far from civilization. I preferred this because I got to see more wildlife. The company I rented the cabin from was in the closest town over, about an hour and a half drive down the mountain from the cabin. There were no phone lines or even a radio. The only way that I could communicate would be to get in my truck and drive to that nearest town. Now, there were other cabins in the hills around the area, so although it wasn't common, it was a complete possibility to see someone out in the woods. A few days into my vacation, I was sitting on the porch, reading a book and having a drink. This was around mid-morning. All of a sudden, I hear a noise in the distance, but I didn't think too much of it. But when I heard more of a rustling, I turned in the direction of the noise. I noticed that there was a man out in the trees. He wasn't doing anything out of the ordinary, and I assumed he was just a hiker. When he noticed that I noticed him, he raised his hand and gave me a wave. I gave a friendly wave back. He was the first person I had seen in a few days, and I have to admit, it was kind of nice to remember I wasn't the only person in the world. He walked off, and I went back to reading my book. I wasn't really paying attention to the time passing. However, I had gotten through a substantial portion of the book before I once again heard a rustling in the woods. When I looked up, it was the same man from before, and he was also standing in the same place. I acknowledged him with a nod of my head. This time, though, he didn't nod back or wave. I mean, it may have seemed longer to me than it was, but it seemed like the guy was watching me for quite a long time. Finally, he left again. I wasn't sure what to think about what happened. I was slightly unnerved, but I also had no reason to be worried. A guy staring at you for a few moments could be any reason, but I decided it was weird enough that I no longer wanted to be outside on the porch, so I grabbed my stuff and went into the house. The rest of the day went fine without me hearing or seeing anything again, but around 10 p.m. that night, I heard some odd sounds coming from the driveway. Remembering seeing that guy around, I got a little nervous. I grabbed my flashlight and went out to the porch, shining the light around, trying to see if the guy had come back again. I walked around to the side of the cabin and the back. Suddenly, I saw some movement among the bushes, and even though I had no reason to believe that it could be him, I did get a bit apprehensive. I hurried back in the house and locked the door. I have to admit to being a bundle of nerves, but I had some scotch and I knew I'd feel better after a few drinks. Well, I did a little bit more than a few, I guess. In fact, I got so tipsy that I stumbled into my room and passed out. I ended up getting up a couple hours later to go pee. I walked through the living room into the bathroom, not turning on any lights. I just peed and went back to bed. I woke up the next morning with a headache. Thankfully, I was on vacation, so I didn't have much to do anyways. I got up and walked into the living room. Two things caught my attention. First, my front door was unlocked. Second, there was a note tacked to the front door reading, "You might want to keep a light on. You walked right past me for your pee break." Needless to say, I left the cabin that day and never returned again. This is a true story. Every time I tell it, it pulls the eyes of everyone in the room. I'm not sure why I haven't posted it before, but upon reflecting with a friend, I decided it was time to share. In the summer of 2020, my friends Alex, Violet, and I decided to go on a mountain vacation. COVID cabin fever had hit us hard and we were desperate to get out. We settled on a mountainous state and planned to camp and hike at several different locations. For one of the nights, we thought it would be fun to book a cabin in the woods. Violet's parents had rented a fire tower once and loved it, but a cabin beside a fire tower was all we could find. It was cheap, clean, and secluded. Excited to have a night where we could be as obnoxious as we wanted, we booked it. The cabin was roughly 30 minutes away from the nearest town. It sat on top of a mountain. We held our breath as we rounded the busted road that spiraled toward the top. There were no pull-offs and no other campsites. Just a long, winding road that led us to the cabin at the peak. We settled in and started a fire to keep warm. As dusk gave way to night, we heard the unmistakable noise of an engine on the road, then saw the flash of headlights. A side-by-side with 3 kids arrived and our nerves settled. They smiled at us, gave us a wave, climbed the fire tower, and then left. We heard there may be occasional visitors to the fire tower, but they were the only ones who'd come by. We doused the fire and moved inside, eating some hot dogs until they were lukewarm, ate them so fast and just sat in silence. You don't know how quiet it is until you're in the middle of nowhere. You can hear every rustle of the leaves, the whisper of the wind through the branches. You get so used to white noise living in the city. There's always a hum of an air conditioning or the dim roar of traffic to focus on. Here, the closest thing to white noise was the sound of our own breathing. We jumped at every noise, too frightened to speak to each other, and finally I had enough. I cracked a few wine coolers, passed them to Alex and Violet, and slapped a board game down on the table between our bunk beds. It didn't take long for us to loosen up, and we were laughing, having the good time we envisioned. Much more sober than we thought, but enough that we were able to ignore the rumble of the woods. Later, we'd all recall hearing noises in the background. The snap of a twig, the dim rumble of an engine. None of us wanted to rupture the air of nonchalance between us, so we ignored it. Until a human hand reached up to the window between us and slapped it 3 times. We were screaming in an instant, and Alex called 911. I held my breath and listened for any more noise. Whoever this was, whatever this was, would have heard us call 911, and now they were being careful to make a silent retreat. Dispatch arrived 20 minutes later, a lucky thing for a 1 a.m. emergency call, and had their dogs comb the mountain, but they found nothing. They suggested it may have been a bear, but I could tell from their faces that they didn't believe that for a second. We'd barely cooked those hot dogs, and why would a bear smack on the window by a couple of screaming kids, rather than the one closest to the pan we'd used to cook? Why would a bear knock on the window like a human? Why, when we screamed, did the bear make a stealthy retreat? They had no answers. As they'd sped to us, they came across another car at the base of the mountain, but that was the only sign of life they'd seen. I remember my blood ran cold, but Violet and Alex were too frazzled to absorb the weight of what they said. And dizzied by a new horror, Violet's car, thoroughly dusted by our drive up the mountain, was now covered in handprints. Handprints that didn't match ours, that touched places we hadn't. We grabbed our shit by the armful and threw it inside, eager to remove every part of ourselves from this mountain. We followed the police down the mountain. We made it down in record time and found lodging at a seedy hotel that reeked of cat piss. I couldn't sleep. The thought of that car on the road rang in my head. Remember, there was nothing else on that mountain. It was a narrow road to the top, no pull-offs, no other campsites. There was a fire tower, so maybe a visitor decided to spook us during their late-night excursion. But the kids from earlier, they had left, and we had seen their headlights. Whoever did this had stopped their vehicle further down the road and hiked the rest of the way. They didn't want to be spotted. They wanted to be silent. Whoever this was hadn't been looking for a cheap scare. They planned this. I don't think I'll ever know what the person on the mountain wanted from us. I don't know if it was a practical joke or the beginning of a night of terror. I'm grateful for Alex's quick wit in calling 911 and I wonder if our visitor knew we had service. It had certainly been a welcome surprise for us. Perhaps that was a wrench in his plan, enough to spook him before he could make things ugly. Honestly, in truth, I don't want to know. I think I'm just content with saying goodbye, stranger. Let's not meet again. Every midsummer, my friends and I made time to visit my buddy Kevin's cabin, which was deep in a northern Minnesota forest. Growing up, we were always accompanied by Kevin's dad, and sometimes our own parents. But when we finally became juniors in high school, we decided we were old enough to make the trip without any adults. To help you picture the place, the cabin sits on a remote island. There are other cabins scattered around, but the closest one is at least a half a mile away, reachable only by a narrow man-made path. To get to Kevin's cabin, you park off on a gravel road, take his boat, and cross nearly a half a mile of lake water. The cabin itself is small and simple. One floor, 2 bedrooms side by side, a connected kitchen, living room, and bathroom in the back. Every room has at least one window without a curtain, which always made me uneasy. At night you could see straight into the woods, or out into the dark lake. And as a kid, I constantly thought someone might be watching. Of course, nothing ever happened, and the older I got, the easier it was to sleep. Now for the event. We usually stayed about 4 or 5 nights. On the 3rd night of this trip, our first time there alone, we lit a campfire and drank beers. I'm not condoning underage drinking, we just felt rebellious. Later, we wandered down to the dock to look at the stars. Out of nowhere, we heard a splash, like a fish jumping for a bug. We turned to look. My friend Ryan pointed and said, what the hell is that?" Once I finally spotted it, my blood ran cold. It looked like a head floating in the middle of the lake, staring straight at us. It was about 3/4 of a football field away. I could clearly make out long black hair and a pale shape of a face, ghost white skin. But the features were blurred, almost like a blank mask. Every hair on my body stood up. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a loon? They hunt at night, dive deep, pop up unexpectedly, and have dark feathers. We told ourselves that over and over, but the head wasn't moving at all. It just stayed in the exact same spot, motionless. Creeped out, we went back to the fire, stoked it higher, and eventually headed inside to drink more. After a while, I had to pee, and since the bathroom was taken, I went outside. When I glanced back at the lake, the dark shape was still there, but now about 30 yards closer. This time I could clearly see the shape of a nose. Same long black hair, same pale face, same feeling of absolute dread. I ran inside and told the others. We stepped back out together and saw it again. Still motionless, still angled upward like it was staring directly at us. Loons drift with the current. This thing wasn't drifting at all. We told ourselves it was a log, but none of us really believed that. Eventually, with the help of more beer and forced denial, we all went back inside. Hours passed and it got late. When I finally looked back out the window, the shape was gone. The cabin was hot in the summer, so we slept with the windows open. I was in the living room with my friend Tommy, and the other 2 were in the bedrooms. But I couldn't sleep. I kept my eyes closed, but my ears were sharp. That's when I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps. Down by the fire pit near the bottom of the stairs. It sounded like boots on wood, pacing back and forth on the dock. After a minute or 2, I heard 2 heavy steps coming up the stairs. Frozen in fear, I couldn't speak. When the sound finally faded, I woke up Tommy. As we sat up, Ryan suddenly came out of his room looking absolutely terrified and said, "We need to leave right now." We asked him what happened, but he didn't answer. He woke up Kevin and told us all to grab our stuff. Finally, as we were packing, Ryan told us what he saw. While turning over in bed, he noticed someone peeking into his window, the top right corner of it. He saw one eye, a shockingly pale face, and the long black hair hanging down that we had seen earlier. It vanished the moment he noticed it. But here's the part that still gives us chills. That window is high. For someone's face to be at the top right corner, they would have needed to be almost 8 feet tall, standing on something, or not standing at all. We didn't clean up or double check anything. We locked the cabin and rushed down the stairs, only to see bare footprints in the dirt circling the cabin and heading into the path. We sprinted to the boat, tossed our stuff in, and just took off. None of us looked back at the water. Once we reached the car and got onto the road, we drove in silence. About 10 miles out, Ryan broke down sobbing, asking, "What was it? What did I see?" We called our parents, told them what happened, and drove home without stopping. It was about 4 or 5 a.m. Kevin's dad went up the next weekend. He didn't see or hear anything unusual, but the barefoot tracks were still there, which disturbed him. What Ryan saw affected him for weeks. He struggled to sleep and eventually needed some help and medication. He got better eventually, but since then he can't sleep next to a curtainless window. To this day, I can't explain what I saw in the lake or what any of us experienced. Kevin and Tommy have gone back since and had no issues. But Ryan refuses to return, and I'm with him. That cabin holds great childhood memories for me, but after that night, something in me changed. Maybe it was just an elaborate prank from someone else on the island. Maybe someone had darker intentions. I'll never know. But the head in the water, the footsteps, the face in the window, and the barefoot tracks, all in one night, that doesn't feel like a coincidence.